latest in a series of virtual town halls. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with KSVY and Sonoma TV.
Recording in progress.
The topic is climate change, environmental stewardship, and the drought. I'm Rick Wynn, one of the volunteer hosts on KSVY 91.3 FM in Sonoma. This evening's town hall is being presented on multiple platforms, including facebook.com/sendbilldodd, sd03.senate.gov.ca, Sonoma TV Comcast Channel 27 in the Sonoma Valley, sonomatv.org, the Sonoma TV channel on YouTube, KSVY 91.3 FM in Sonoma, and streaming on ksvy.org and on your home smart device. Just say play KSVY. Tonight's event features three distinguished panelists discussing what California can and is doing to reverse the effects of climate change, protect the environment, and respond to the historic drought. They will take your questions starting at 6:30. The studio call-in number is 707-933-9133. That's at 6:30. The number is 707-933-9133, and we'll get you on the air as soon as we can. Senator Bill Dodd represents all or part of 6 North Bay counties, including Napa, Sonoma, Solano, Contra Costa, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. And now I turn it over to Senator Dodd, who will make some opening remarks and introduce this evening's panel. Welcome, Senator Dodd.
Thank you very much, Rick. I really want to thank our panelists and to KSVY for convening this latest in a series of town halls. This is number 14 since the pandemic has started, and really appreciate KSVY hosting this platform again tonight. But tonight we'll be talking about the effects of climate change on our world and what we can do about it. I'm very glad to be joined by this distinguished group, and thanks to the hundreds of people tuning in tonight. The fact that you are here shows your concern. We will take your emailed questions and open the phone lines as you heard earlier at 6:30. Again, the call-in number is 707-933-9133. Climate change is here and has revealed a series of existential challenges that are sadly becoming well known to all. In California, a lack of rain and snowfall has dried our landscape, shrinking reservoirs and threatening water supplies for communities and farmers. Much of the state is now in the grips of an exceptional drought. In many areas, water restrictions are in effect. The winter forecast for continued dry weather is not helping either. Those same conditions over the past 5 or more years have left our wildlands vulnerable to fire. Because of climate change, our fire seasons start sooner, last longer, and are certainly more destructive. Firefighters are just now getting a handle on the Dixie Fire, which started in July and has grown to nearly 1 million acres. In fact, the top 5 largest wildfires in California's long history of fires have occurred over the last 3 years. This season, we are on track to match 2020 when we set a record with nearly 10,000 fires, destroying 4.2 million acres. Emissions from the fires themselves are contributing to a greater problem of adding greenhouse gases to our atmosphere. Carbon dioxide from last year's wildfires were equal to what comes from the tailpipes of over 24 million cars over the course of a year. That's on top of worsening air quality during fires that shroud our communities in unhealthy orange haze. It's part of a worsening cycle that is superheating our planet, melting our polar caps, causing sea level rise, and triggering tropical storms in other parts of the world. The cause of all this is clear. It is us, human activity, our dependence on fossil fuels, and our just inability to really work harder together across our huge world are the major factors driving this change. With that awareness, there are possible solutions, though. Curbing the use of fossil fuels is key. Knowing that, California has set a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions below 40% of 1990 levels by 2030. We also are pursuing policy approaches ranging from increasing the use of renewable energy to sequestering carbon in lands. and throughout the state, individuals, communities, business, and land managers are taking on the challenge to address these climate goals with grants and incentives from government and foundations. And part of it's being addressed through voluntary and regulatory action. And our governor has really stepped forward with executive actions, over the last year that I think are very promising in guiding the state moving forward. The bottom line is we know bold action is needed to reverse climate change, and we can't afford to sit idly by. But we're not doing that. California will continue to be a leader in addressing climate change. As a state senator, I'm committed to supporting data-driven, thoughtful policy to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets. Simply put, it is the single most important challenge we face, but we must address it and do it right. Here tonight are three people to talk about the problems and what we can and should do to be better stewards of our water and lands. And I first really want to take this opportunity to thank all three of them for taking time out of their busy schedules. I know that they're all incredibly busy with what's going on, and you'll hear more why they're so busy as they get into their comments. But first, Wade Crowfoot is California's Natural Resources Secretary, appointed by Governor Newsom in 2019. He oversees an agency of 21,000 employees who protect and manage California's natural resources. This includes the state's forest and natural lands, rivers and waterways, coast and ocean, fish and wildlife, and energy development. As a member of the governor's cabinet, he advises the governor on natural resources and environmental issues. Joaquin Esquivel was appointed to the State Water Resources Control Board by Governor Brown in March of 2017 and was named chair of the board by Governor Newsom in 2019. Previously, he served as an assistant secretary for federal water policy at the California Natural Resources Agency in the governor's Washington, D.C. office, where he facilitated the development of priorities between the agency, the governor, the California congressional delegation, and federal stakeholders. And Jay Ziegler is the Nature Conservancy's Director of Policy and External Affairs. Jay oversees the California's chapter engagements at the federal, state, and regional levels. He has also served in communications and policy development roles in state and federal government, including with the Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt, focusing on endangered species, public lands, water, and natural resource management across the West. Again, I want to thank all three of you for being here. Really appreciate it. I've really gotten to know all three of you and really respect the jobs that you're doing and appreciate your time here with me today. But we're going to start out tonight with Secretary Crowfoot. Let's hear from you, sir.
Thanks so much, Senator Dodd. Pretty remarkable that you've done 14 of these town hall meetings in recent months. And big thanks to KSBY for hosting them. If there's a silver lining of this pandemic, it's that we've all gotten used to having these meetings from remote locations. Listen, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is science tells us what Californians are experiencing right now. We're seeing it, we're smelling it, we're feeling it, and that is the acceleration of climate change. We know it's driving more catastrophic wildfires. It's driving worsening drought condition, extreme temperatures and heat. And never too far from our mind is the flooding risks with these big winter atmospheric rivers and sea level rise. That's the challenge. I think the good news is California is leading the world, as you said, reducing carbon pollution. We are showing that as the world's 5th largest economy, we can continue to grow prosperity in our state while reducing carbon emissions. That is decoupling economic prosperity from pollution. And that's a huge deal. A lot of tough work ahead of us as we continue to reduce our carbon pollution through things like electrifying transportation, expanding renewable energy. At the same time, though, we know the impacts of climate change are already here. And we have to protect California's communities and natural places from these impacts. So this summer, we're staring down the barrel of a really tough wildfire season, as you pointed out, as well as a worsening drought. I think the good news here is our legislature and our governor agree, no matter where they come from in the state and across the aisle, that we need to invest a lot of resources, a lot of political focus on actually protecting communities and natural places from these impacts. The wildfire, for example, thanks to you, Senator, and your colleagues and the governor, we have more resources for CAL FIRE to respond to wildfires than we ever have. I'd say we have the world's most sophisticated response force for wildland firefighting. Also, thanks to the legislature, we have remarkable work done to hold utilities accountable to reduce utility risk from wildfire. And the part that I'm really involved in is building, quote unquote, resilience to wildfires. That is, we know wildfires are a natural part of our natural systems in California, but we have to get away from them becoming so big and catastrophic. And we have to protect communities in the meantime. So this year, our legislature governor agreed on spending $1.5 billion to build our resilience. That's outside of all the CAL FIRE response costs. And those are investments in communities through things like defensible space, home hardening, community planning, evacuation, around communities through these shaded fuel breaks, like in the Caldor fire that lets firefighters make a stand to protect communities, and then broadly across the landscapes. One reality is, while we know climate change and extreme temperatures have driven wildfire, we also know that a century of wildfire exclusion policy, in other words, putting out every wildfire, not doing enough in our forest, has paid its toll. And that is, we have forests that are, going up like a box of matches. And so we need to do more across landscapes to actually reduce the risk of these fires becoming really big. So that's an area that we're focused on, wildfire, and we'll get more into drought. But I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to talk here tonight.
Thank you very much, Secretary Crowfoot. We're going to move now to Joaquin Esquivel, as I've already introduced. Welcome, and thank you so much, sir, for being on with us this evening.
Thank you as well, Senator. Really appreciate this convening and everyone's time and attention this evening. I have incredible colleagues, and I'm fortunate to be part of the state's response. I'm just transitioning right now from a board meeting, actually, where we just heard earlier this morning a report from the operators of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project and our sister agencies on the state and federal biological agency side around just how challenging this next year is going to be if things remain dry. Drought is really front of mind, but regrettably, it's also wildfire. It's also COVID response. And ultimately, it's about our communities and the stresses that they are under, and want to acknowledge that the community here in the Russian River watershed has done an extraordinary thing this summer in responding to drought conditions, working with the board as we've enacted curtailments here early on. One of the first communities Governor Newsom and us as an administration came down, began working with, and really be helping support the local leadership that makes a huge difference in drought response. And so I just want to acknowledge all the work that's already been going on these last months and truly years. When you think about the investments that Sonoma Water has made in things like forecast-informed reservoir operations and other really critical investments in the systems sort of thinking that needs to go on, including recycled water. We need to be expanding our water portfolio. It's why Governor Newsom and the rest of us here as an administration took the leadership in developing the water resiliency portfolio, because it's about conserving, as we know, and was so critical to the response here in the Russian River. Earlier today, we had an update around conservation numbers statewide voluntarily here in July, which importantly, the governor didn't put in a request for voluntary conservation across the state until July 8th. So these are preliminary numbers, but we're looking at about 2% across the state conservation. But importantly, here in the Russian River watershed, in places like Healdsburg and Ukiah and Sonoma, the average is around 17%, 18%, far greater than just even that voluntary 15%. Of course, because of the need for mandatory response, knowing that lake levels in Lake Mendocino incredibly tied to everyone's usage of that water in the watershed, and everyone leaning in is reflective, again, of this data that we're seeing. So I want to start by just again acknowledging the lived experience of everyone here in the community. And to the Senator's point and to Secretary Crowfoot's point, there is a way forward through these challenges. And California has seen droughts before. We have some of the greatest variability when it comes to our hydrology. And so many communities have been making investments in things like water recycling and conservation. I think of the fact that Southern California has nearly 6 million plus additional residents and still using the same amount since the mid-90s. Conservation is an important component here, but so again are the investments that grow the pie and continue to help us adapt our 20th century water systems for the 21st century climate that we know we have. I just will acknowledge as well, when we look at wildfire, there are costs that really begin to add up around water quality and impacts to water system. There, I know here, the Tubbs fire comes to mind, I know for many, and still recovering from and rebuilding from that disaster here in the community. And what we saw was, for some of the first times, the sort of contamination that can happen to drinking water systems because of the severity and intensity of the burning and fire, and because of where it's impacting our communities. These are all things we will continue to need to get better about. What are the toxins that are released after wildfire and drinking water systems? How do we recover better after these circumstances? And how do we make critically the investments that continue to allow us to adapt to the obvious climate that we have now and give ourselves an ability for our communities to ensure that they adapt to that change that we have here with climate change, but importantly, also overcome a number of inequities that already exist and are persistent still for decades amongst our water systems. All of this is a challenge that faces our communities, but from my seat, I can speak firmly. I know that there's the leadership and the will and the blueprint, if you will, for success here in the state of California. And it requires us to be data-driven. It requires us to be specific around our actions and to see the systems for the complexity that they are. I feel unfortunate that the reality is that many of our systems were developed with a hydrology that simply doesn't exist, and we can't adapt fast enough. But it takes the local leadership and will to develop projects, to lead discussions here that help us find a way. And so the state is here to support that decision making, and just thankful for the continued work that I know will be coming up. And I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel. We certainly appreciate your leadership on the State Water Board. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to Jay Ziegler with the Nature Conservancy. Jay, take it away.
Senator, sorry about that. I think I was muted there. But hey, I just want to thank you for this conversation tonight. It's critically important for California's future. You are living at the front lines of many of these challenges in the legislature, and want to thank you for your leadership on issues like science-driven decision-making, water data transparency laws that you've brought forward. And what I also want to share with you today is you're looking at Secretary Crowfoot and Chair Esquivel, who are really also striving to advance the pace and scale of science-based, data-driven decision-making and natural resources management. Will fundamentally help us deal with the climate challenges and deal with it in a way that's objective and helps explain why we need to do things differently. And so I just want to assure you that, I tell you, you have two tireless co-advocates with you here, Senator, and Secretary Crowfoot and Chair Esquivel, and really bringing science forward as the critical decision driver in really complex challenges. And so I'm optimistic today. I mean, I think we're turning the corner and really meeting a dramatic change in pace and scale of use of science in objective decision-making in a way that is really going to make a difference in addressing climate change challenges. And just quite immediately, I want to thank all three of you in fundamentally delivering almost $10 billion in new investment from the state budget this year to really move the dial and building capacity to address the fire situations. Senator, you've been a leader this year in moving policy to address fire issues at a landscape scale, which we have to do to get these mega fires under control. Director Esquivel, you've been amazing at really bringing people together to have hard conversations at the Water Board, and I'm really appreciative of that. And fundamentally, Secretary Crowfoot has really demonstrated an ability to reach across aisles, bring diverse interests together, to have difficult conversations, and we've got to do that. So I look forward to the discussion tonight, and I thank all of you for the commitment that you've really brought forward to put resources on the table to address these issues and fundamentally help us turn the corner in this state, the smartest, most technology advanced economy in the world, to actually use the science, make it available to people across the spectrum, and make better decisions on natural resources management. It is fundamentally important, and I thank you all for that.
Well, thank you, Jay. I appreciate the Nature Conservancy's leadership on the environmental side, and really, from a practical matter, being a great partner, understanding that it's a multifaceted issues that we're dealing with. I've always appreciated your advocacy and also your partnership. That's very important in all the things that we have to do. So, Rick, I think we're probably a little early, but nevertheless, maybe we can start with questions.
Yeah, we have. I have to say, in all of the ones that we've done here, Senator, the volume of emailed questions on this exceeds all others. And often the questions are very long, full of commentary, and I am going to try to synthesize what I can to make the question answerable as opposed to a statement. The first one is for you, Senator Dodd, and the legislature has taken affirmative steps towards addressing climate change, like passing SB 100 in 2018, set the bold, achievable goal of powering California with 100% clean, carbon-free electricity by 2045. At the same time, you and many of your Democratic colleagues recently withheld support from AB 1395, the California Climate Crisis Act. Can you explain your reasoning?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, our governor, who's been a leader not only throughout the state, but throughout our country and world on climate, has an executive order. So this is already in the plans and the process. And while I support the intent of the specific bill that was before us, AB 1395, I just thought it needed more work. We must achieve climate goals in a thoughtful, data-driven way. And AB 1395 was introduced before we could receive the results of a critical scoping study that will better inform us on how to proceed. And I'm hoping that we can find a solution that we can pass next year. This is a 2-year legislative cycle, and I really believe that we need this extra year to really do the job we need. Now, of course, I supported SB 100 in 2018, which set a bold but achievable goal by powering California with 100% clean, carbon-free electricity by 2045. And whatever we do, we'll build on that. And I can assure you, we're already working on it. Frankly, I've talked to a number of my Senate colleagues are very, very interested in moving the ball forward in this area, but we're going to do it with data-driven results.
Let's go to the fires real quick for Secretary Crowfoot. What's California doing to reduce combustible fuels that are fueling wildfires? Especially in this area, we're awfully sensitive to wildfires.
Absolutely. I mean, the North Bay has been, one area really hard hit by wildfires in the last several years. And it's a place that actually counties and cities, groups like fire safe councils, but also the state are investing a lot of money in doing just that, which is reducing dangerous fuels around communities in order to protect those communities. And where we can, reintroducing prescribed fire onto the landscape. what's pretty remarkable is California's tribal communities were exercising prescribed fire. That is small, sort of low-level fire that burns through the ground of woods or forest, but doesn't catch the whole forest on fire. They were doing those prescribed fires for thousands of years. And it was actually our state government that stopped the use of that prescribed fire. And we have to do more of it. We have to do more of these fuel breaks around communities that are not a silver bullet, but that reduce the speed and the severity of fires that are threatening communities and allow firefighters to take a stand. We need to do more of this vegetation thinning, which we call vegetation management, across landscapes to really ensure a healthy ecological habitat for our fish and wildlife. But also when that fire comes through, it doesn't burn as hot as some of these catastrophic fires are burning. And then we need to get more prescribed fire on the landscape. I'm glad to report that actually we are now going to spend more money this year, taxpayer dollars, on these projects than we ever have before, by a factor of more than 10 times. And our goal is not to make decisions in Sacramento with some one-size-fits-all solution, but it's to support regional leadership, where these regional priority plans are coming together, like in the North Bay and North Coast, to identify what are the most important projects that need to get funded. And then the idea is those regional leaders, whether they're county supervisors or tribal governmental leaders or fire safe councils, resource conservation districts, they're getting together, prioritizing these projects, and then the state is pushing resources to those projects so that there's always a pipeline of projects that's getting done. Again, not a silver bullet, and it's going to take time, but with these investments, we're going to slowly but surely, and as quickly as possible, frankly, build the resilience of our state to these wildfires. I mean, these wildfires are here to stay. The question is, do they continue to burn hot and dangerous, or are they more manageable so that we can continue to thrive in our communities and our natures and fish and wildlife are safe as well? So I'm optimistic. A lot of work ahead of us, but definitely progress in the right direction.
So are the goals of protecting wildlife and building California's prosperity at odds with each other?
No, absolutely not. I think we live in California. Californians enjoy and love our state for a couple good reasons. One is there's tremendous economic opportunity and prosperity here. I mentioned we're the 5th largest economy in the world. People like me move to California when we're young because of the opportunity, and we need to maintain that opportunity. But we also love California for this beautiful place and the nature that's here, whether it's Yosemite or Big Sur or the county park in our backyard. And California has demonstrated that economic prosperity growth can exist with good environmental conservation. I'd say Californians demand that of us. So we're going to find ways to continue to conserve the environment and grow opportunities for Californians. A lot of the work that we have to do on natural resource management, like this forest management, will actually create jobs. So from my perspective, a good, strong agenda for environmental sustainability can be a good, strong agenda for economic prosperity.
I think we'd rather create those kind of jobs than firefighting jobs.
Yeah, well, let's do it. I mean, firefighters every summer, year in, year out, are heroic, and they're the reason why communities are still standing across the state. But we can't respond our way out of this wildfire crisis. We need to continue to build the response capacity, get more boots on the ground, but there's a lot of proactive upfront work that we need to do. So when those firefighters hit the ground to protect our residents, they have a fighting chance of doing so because these fires, aren't coming at them 200 feet tall.
Chair Esquivel, does the Water Board anticipate the need for mandatory water rationing across the state? I know it's done I don't know if it's actually done at all. We have a suggestion in Sonoma County that we reduce by 20%. Also, a large segment of California depends on groundwater and wells. What are the challenges in maintaining that groundwater during a drought?
Thank you. I think important to note that a number of communities have had mandatory conservation here through the summer because water conditions, drought conditions simply dictate that we need to see that real mandatory response in places. And when it comes to the need for a statewide mandatory conservation target, right now we have the governor has put out a voluntary call. We're at the front of really booting up what is the state's response for conservation, putting in the investments that we know translate then into the savings that we saw in the last drought. But important to note, in that last drought, we started with a voluntary call, we gave time, and we progressed through a discussion with our water providers on how best we can ensure that all Californians are taking serious the threat of continued drought, but importantly, that we continue to put ourselves on the track for the future here and recognize that this isn't our last drought and that we will see other deeper droughts because of climate change. And it means we really need to drive down and ensure that conservation is a California way of life. And the good news there is we still are holding on to 17% conservation from the last drought. So we know that Californians are more conscious of their water usage. We know that it's really outdoor irrigation that we have the most, that we can find additional savings at. And so we're going to be, again, data driven here. Just today, there was a report to the board, again, on what those first numbers were looking like in July. But what we have is the benefit of mandatory monthly reporting that goes on so that we can understand how are we responding all to drought. And importantly, we're seeing, Healdsburg, I think, has mandatory conservation up in excess of 40%. And we're seeing responses from the community. And so we have to acknowledge that great work, that it is important when we talk about these really catastrophic and emergency drought conditions we're facing, that everyone pitch in, and that there's a lot of variation throughout the state. But I think the common message is you can't really conserve enough given the future we know we're in now because of climate change. And it's going to be a really critical tool to drive down that consumption, especially here in the arid West. And I think California has been a model of that here then already.
No, it's not our first one. I'm a native Californian. I remember the 70s. I remember, not flushing the toilet with my kids. But what we didn't have the combination of the drought and the fires then. And climate change obviously is a big factor in that. Our lines are open at 707-933-9133, 707-933-9133. And we have Donna Morgan from Napa to talk about hotels and wineries. Donna?
Are you there?
Yes.
Yes. So, wineries and hotels. Okay, just a minute.
You got to turn off.
It's off.
Okay, Donna. Go ahead.
Okay. Hotels and wineries utilize huge amounts of water. And we continue in Napa Valley to approve new hotels and new wineries. Is there going to be anything done to restrict the amount of water that these facilities use?
Let me start with that. What we're trying to do in the state of California is we have a framework, and then the chair can chime in on this. And that's why we've added the groundwater portion of our regulation in the state of California. And I know, Donna, that here locally they were required to form this a water local committee. Sustainable Groundwater Management Committee, and they're doing that now. And I think that the idea is the people that are local have a better idea of what needs to be done in those areas, but there's a framework from which we're doing that through the basis of these groundwater management, sustainable groundwater agencies. Chair, do you want to kind of fill in there?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. If you think of the various sources of water and how to be most efficient of those, when it comes to groundwater, we have the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. That's helping at this basin level really better manage our groundwater resources. So those are there for the long term. When it comes to the efficiency of, say, how water is used in a new hotel, or even at a winery, when it comes to the fixtures or the way that we continue to drive efficiency in that usage, we're also developing long-term efficiency standards with the Department of Water Resources that will act as budgets for water agencies to use, that is knowledge that is informed by what is your current indoor water usage? What are the gallons per capita per day, as we say, around that? What's being used outdoor? And then also, what is the water loss of a system? Those numbers together will create these budgets that water systems live by, and that those businesses that are within those water districts will then also be driving towards. So we have ways that we're setting standards for efficiency that are helping drive that long term, and help ensure that our businesses and our households are at a basis as efficient as they can be, moving into this climate that we now have here with us.
We had a couple of questions with regard to construction, a couple of other things. Can all new construction be required to be green? I know PG&E hates losing money to solar, but nobody likes them since they started burning down cities. This is from Pamela Parrott. And the other question is about technology to capture rainwater built into homes. So who would like to tackle those two things?
I'm glad to jump in. Not a lot of folks know that California has a pretty remarkable building code for new buildings. And so new buildings that are built in California, whether it's a home or a hotel, are among the most energy efficient and water efficient in America, if not the world. So on the energy side, the average Californian uses about half the energy every year as the average American. And a lot of that is because our building code requires our buildings to be more energy efficient. And the good news on water is that building code has also been updated in the last couple of decades to create requirements for more water efficient homes and buildings. So, the way I see it is that, new buildings in California are almost by definition green buildings, which I think is really, really good. Now, that most of our building stock obviously are existing homes and existing buildings. So we need to get in there and help and incentivize folks to change out their shower heads and their faucets and the like. And a lot of water agencies in the North Bay actually have incentives to be able to do that, which is really good. I think that the frustration, anger with the utilities, including PG&E, is well understood given the wildfires. And I have to give credit to Senator Dodd for leading this effort in the legislature to hold utilities more accountable for the wildfire safety. And there's actually a division in my agency, our agency, called the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. And there is more oversight, more requirements on utilities than there ever has been to actually invest their money in ensuring that their energy infrastructure has limited or minimal risk for wildfire. That doesn't get us out of the woods. At the end of the day, we still have wildfire risks from utility infrastructure, but I think that there's huge progress underway, and I think you'll see more and more of work by PG&E and other utilities out there along these utility lines to reduce the risks of fire.
There's a number of questions about creating more water or capturing more water. Are there any plans to create more reservoirs to retain more water given the increase in population? When was the last reservoir completed? Why can't we pump Sacramento Water River into man-made non-toxic wells? Why can't we build wells along the 400 miles of the Sacramento River for storage? Are there ways, I hate that, the Russian River, I was up there last weekend and it's not much left. But when it's rushing, I hate to see it rush out into Jenner and into the ocean. I think we all hate to see that. What can be done in this area?
Well, I would say a few things, and I'd invite Joaquin or Jay to jump in. We have a 20th century infrastructure for 21st century problems. That's something Joaquin says a lot that I'm stealing from. And that reservoir system did really well for us when there were a lot less people in the state and before the impacts of climate change. The challenge is we have, again, this more variable hydrology, longer droughts, worse flooding. And so we can't rely on these reservoirs. Now, people say, let's build more reservoirs. And there is some room to do that in certain locations. But largely speaking, most of the really good locations for reservoirs, or at least for water supply, are taken. And we know a lot more today about the impact of reservoirs on fish, including our salmon, that supports a fishing industry and is part of, our natural heritage. So, while there are some opportunities for targeted surface reservoirs, there's a whole lot more potential to get water underground. Our underground aquifers have been reduced over time, and there's plenty of capacity to store water underground. And so Joaquin's board has done a lot of work around how do we help water users during these big winter months, as you say, Rick, move water through the rivers and actually store it underground by recharging these groundwater basins. We think that's really the big idea, where we can take more of these big winter Pineapple Express storms that drop a lot of water and actually get them into groundwater basins for use. That groundwater works as a savings account that gets tapped during drought times, and it's getting tapped now. So to me, the name of the game on storage moving forward, largely is recharging our groundwater basins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I think Secretary Crowfoot's kind of hit this on the head. If you look at the reservoirs across California today, they're running dry, and that's our real risk. And fundamentally, it would take in excess of almost a doubling of our usual winter conditions, even to get them up to close to normal and where they are. So we're fundamentally not going to build our way out of a drought crisis building new reservoirs. But if we can adopt a new strategy of targeting the right kinds of floodplains, riparian zones, agricultural areas to actually recharge groundwater, Rick, that's going to be the answer that we have to invest in. This is actually 300 times the water supply potential as thinking that we can get it out of surface water reservoirs. So we've got to be, again, I think, much more science-based in this approach. And I think Secretary's really hit it on the head here.
I assume, Director Ziegler, that sucking water out of the Sacramento River in some manner would not be within nature's plan.
Well, we're already doing it, and we've got a number of the from the headwaters of the Shasta to the Yuba River and Feather. We've pretty much tapped the tributaries, Rick. And is there an opportunity to do something that's environmentally friendly at the Sites Reservoir area? That we still need to figure out, right? We got to figure out if we've got enough water in major storm events, and what's the cost of that for the water users and beneficiaries if we want to protect salmon. And we've got to really, again, what I do appreciate about the conversation tonight is that I think what you're hearing here is a real commitment to science-based natural resource decision-making, which is what we have to do in this climate-changing world that I think makes all of us uncomfortable. And it's the changes around us. I'm a second-generation Californian, and I am astounded at the pace of changes that I see from forest headwaters to the coast in this state, and what it's doing to nature all around us. And fundamentally, I think most of us are here as Californians because of the uniqueness of this place, because it is the most biologically diverse place in the lower 48. And it is just, these are going to be difficult times to manage to meet the needs of nature and people at the same time. And we got to be more open about it. We got to use more science so that folks understand the choices that we're making. It's happening faster than any of us are comfortable with, and we've got to rely on the science to get it right.
Yeah,
Again,
I think, Jay and Secretary Crowfoot, I just have to emphasize their points here, because it really is about a 21st century approach to these systems and recognizing that we're reconciling in many ways decisions that were made when we didn't understand as much the floodplain connectivity and groundwater recharge importance of the landscape that we found. And instead, we paved over the majority of our wetlands and really altered the landscape in ways that we're now having to go back and rebuild these services that were there naturally before. Secretary Crowfoot talked about the land management that our California Native Americans actually conducted for millennia. And I think it's an example of the way in which we really didn't understand fully what it was that we came in here and inherited and made a number of decisions that we're having to reconcile now in the face of climate change. And we're going to have to think differently about storage. And we'll just say that there are examples of storage that are going up, but it is the right kind of storage. Recently, the board supported Santa Margarita, a water district in Southern California, a storage facility for them that is holding recycled water, because we know that, the recycled water is produced 24/7. You need to be able to hold it. It's that sort of smart investment in this sort of infrastructure that will support our 21st century water systems that we need to continue to recognize. And being data-driven, recognizing the interconnectivity of groundwater amongst the systems, all of that is what's so exciting about the opportunities we all have collectively here for the generational reinvestments in these systems to begin with.
Speaking of 21st century technology, a number of questions about there's the Pacific Ocean right next door to us. How do we desalinate it? Or are we? Are we looking at it? Where are we with that?
Yeah, there's some desalination in California already. In places like Israel, get a lot of their water from desalination. Couple few things about desalination, and that is, of course, taking salt water from the ocean and removing the salt and then using it for human use. One is it's pretty expensive compared to other water sources, even recycling your water. It's also energy intensive, which you have to use a lot of energy to separate the salt from the water. And so for those two reasons, it's certainly a tool in the toolbox that some coastal communities have considered. And again, in places like Carlsbad in Southern California, they have it. But I think a lot of coastal communities are more focused on new efforts like recycling water or capturing stormwater in the groundwater basins, frankly, because it's cheaper. Certainly, it always needs to be part of the conversation, but it really should be assessed from those angles. And then, of course, there are major environmental impacts, at least with the historic technologies for desalination, because it sucks in so much ocean water. And Californians rightly love their coast and their ocean environment. So, energy impacts, cost, and environmental impacts mean that desalination is a tool in the toolbox, but I think a lot of communities are prioritizing other ways to diversify their water supplies first.
The expense, primarily. 707-933-9133. We've got about 10 minutes left if you'd like to make a call. Director Ziegler, what are the most pressing conservation issues in California today? We know we have fire, we know we have water, we have wind. There's a song there, I think.
Or a band, too.
That's right, Earth, Wind, and Fire. Very good.
Yeah, well, look, we're talking about it. And I think, honestly, it's coming to terms with the multifaceted challenges of climate change at our doorstep that are really, fundamentally alarming, right? I mean, there's none of these, to think we're talking about seeing as much as 5% of the state burn in a year, I think should be alarming to everyone. I think to think about reservoirs potentially going dry next year should be alarming to everyone about the magnitude of the challenges that are confronting us. And we've got to develop a 21st century solution set, as Chair Esquivel underscored, and as I've seen Secretary Crowfoot commit to, and really driving the science first and understanding the magnitude of the challenges in front of us. There is, as we also think about this, Rick, we have, next year, the Nature Conservancy is among groups that have been working to qualify an initiative to reduce our plastic waste consumption in the state. And again, this is fundamentally a climate issue. If we don't do anything, we're going to see just the production, use, distribution, and disposal of plastics. It will be 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. Forget about oil and gas for transport or energy, just plastic alone. And so at the same time, plastic is literally strangling freshwater and ocean ecosystems. And we have an opportunity to do something about it in the state. And the voters will have that opportunity next November. And so we've got to really ramp up the investment in science-focused climate change solutions. And we've got to identify these problems with the right solution sets to move forward. And so we're excited about something that we're helping to bring to the voters next year. And we got to have action, and we got to have a much broader discussion. And I thank you and Senator Dodd for pulling these kinds of forums together, because these are going to be difficult discussions. I am not going to be able to save everything in nature, no matter how much my heart bleeds for it. And we are going to have tough decisions ahead. And I know that the folks that you've got together here today to talk about it are committed to those difficult conversations, and we have to have them.
Well, it is heartening to see the Nature Conservancy and the state on the same page. We do have some calls. Rhea from Davis would like to ask about rain capture. Rhea?
Great, thank you. So my question is, as there were incentive programs for removing lawn in order to save on water use, is there viability to having an incentive program for encouraging residential rainwater capture systems like from roofs?
Yes. Yes. I'll just say, I know in the last drought, we supported and had, and importantly here, many local water agencies have programs for rain barrels and other rain capture sort of devices. So what we're still looking at is making sure that we ensure we have the financial support at the state level for those local water agencies. Again, many who I know are already have programs out there, have rebates for things like rain barrels, but also replacement of fixtures and lawn replacement generally. It really does vary where you live, who your water agency is. And there even, I think, maybe an opportunity for us to better aggregate. And I know in the last drought, there were efforts to better aggregate what are the offerings at that local level, knowing that it can be very dependent on who your water agency is.
And I would just add, rain barrels, as the caller probably knows well, are not that hard to set up. And the idea is, you capture that water on the roof in these big storms, and then you have a water supply to water your outdoor plants for a long while. Just one example of like everybody can play a role in actually stepping up to help us, get through these droughts.
And at least make sure that your drains from your roof go into the ground as opposed to out on the street. We have Rick from Rohnert Park on reusing treated wastewater. Rick, you're on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Given the relentless increase in California's population and the apparent decrease in our water supply, it seems to me we're going to have to sooner or later get over the yuck factor and start drinking treated wastewater. It's not such a silly idea. It's actually being done in some places. Wastewater treatment processes are so good today that the water that comes out at the end is even cleaner than the water in places like the Russian River or Lake Sonoma. If we do that, we can get, say, 5 gallons of usage out of 1 gallon of rainwater. So, and it's a lot cheaper than desalination. So I'd just like to hear a commentary from the panelists here about the prospects for doing this. Thank you.
I'll start with just here. Recycled water is such a critical component of drought, creating drought resilience here in the state. I'm proud that the State Water Board has been able to invest over just the last 5 years or so about $1 billion into recycled water projects throughout the state. and that we've seen a real continued increase in the development of recycled water projects, and they're contributing to places not just on the coast where we do see a lot of the investment because of the economies and scale and cost that it comes for these systems, but also places like in the Central Valley where the city of Sirius and Modesto are recycling the water and using it and sending it over to Delta Preto Water District, where it's actually going into the infrastructure there to be delivered to agriculture. Those opportunities to really, again, a common theme here, think of our systems in a 21st century way is really critical. I was proud actually earlier this week to be at the Water Reuse Conference, where we're continuing to celebrate the fact that there's increased funding coming from the federal side and here in the state for these water recycling projects. Additionally, the state board is developing direct potable reuse regulations. These are the next generation of projects out there. And instead of just augmenting groundwater resources and our surface water, they'll be directly plugged into our drinking water systems and really creating that next step and certainty that people can trust that the protection for public health is there, even as we really advance these cutting edge projects. So yes, there's an opportunity. We need to do more. We recycle almost about 800,000 acre feet a yearly in the state of California now that's being put to use that would otherwise, to your point, just be used once and let down. And I want to acknowledge there's communities like the Santa Ana River watershed where the water there, it's one of the hardest working drops of water in the state of California. They reuse it as it goes down the watershed 2, 3, 4 times. And that's an incredible resource in need. So just thank you for those points.
You're on mute, Rick.
I've never done this before. I was on mute. Bob from Fairfield is on line 1 talking about protecting the Delta. You're on, Bob.
Thanks. And I just was concerned that there hasn't been talk. We've kind of talked around the Delta, which is our so precious estuary. And how are we going to deal with preserving the precious water in the Delta? Can anyone answer that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good point, which is, our Delta is this remarkable place for the communities and the kind of its heritage, for its environment. It's a biodiversity hotspot. It also happens to be a key part of the water delivery system to over 25 million Californians. And as the sea level rises, we're going to get more intrusion of that salt deeper into the Delta. And that's a real challenge. In a year like this, when we have low flows from the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, that's a real problem because the salt water starts to creep into the inner Delta and threaten those fresh water supplies, again, for almost 2/3 of water users in the state, not to mention all the environmental impacts. So there's a lot of work that has to happen in the Delta, including strengthening the levees, restoring habitat. Obviously, controversial is this notion of putting Delta, and that's a real challenge for in a year like this when we have low flows from the Sacramento and San Joaquin.
Hold on, Bob, can you turn off your radio or hang up?
Go ahead. Fix.
Yeah,
go ahead.
And so I was going to say just a moment on the underground conveyance in the Delta, which I know is really a point of concern for those living there. The notion there is protecting that fresh water supply from earthquake risk and from sea level rise, ensuring it can actually get to parts of the Bay Area and the Central Valley and Southern California that rely on that water, but doing it in a way that actually allows enough flow to continue to go through the Delta for Delta farmers, for communities there, and for fish. So it's going to be a challenge. The Delta is going to be severely impacted by climate change, and we're going to have to focus a lot of time and money on ensuring that it can continue to be a place to live and a place for fish and wildlife to survive.
All right, gentlemen, hold on 1 second. KSVY Sonoma. Go.
Okay, we had to do a little FCC work there. Jay Ziegler, do you have a comment on that, on the Delta?
I think we know we're seeing pretty alarming stress in this ecosystem, as Secretary Crowfoot noted, and I think we've got to This is a place in particular where we started in the early 90s with the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, thinking that we were going to recover salmon, and all of the numbers for fall run, winter run, spring run have gone the wrong direction. And we've got to redouble our efforts on the water quality side, on the habitat side. And here's a place in particular where open and transparent science is going to be absolutely critical to bring Northern California along with any project in the Delta. And I just want to underscore that I think the caller is absolutely right. That in many ways it's sort of like it's like this our central organ system as we kind of look at it, and we're seeing it under extreme stress here, and we need to really have a very science-based approach in thinking about how we're going to make the Delta more sustainable. So I appreciate hearing the Secretary kind of commit to really driving that sort of science-based, action-focused approach there.
Gentlemen, that's it for us. The time we have, I think just to summarize, the issues that we were discussing tonight are as complicated and as diverse as the population of California, and as voluminous. And I think that I'm encouraged, and I hope that our listeners are encouraged by what they've heard and the people who are in charge of stewarding us along this path. Thank you all very much for being here. Senator Dodd, I'll leave it up to you to close the session.
Hi, Rick. Once again, thank you to you and to KSVY for doing this, our 14th town hall, and to Director Ziegler, to Chair Esquivel, and to Secretary Crowfoot. I really want to just thank you guys for just being available, resources to me all the time, but being here tonight, taking time out of your busy schedules for the people, and look, it's District 3, but it's well beyond District 3 that's on this tonight, because this is a situation that goes way beyond any Senate district. It's our entire state. It's our future. We know that we have to do better. And I really appreciate the ability to work with the administration and also the other environmental groups and also agriculture. I mean, fisheries, we've got everybody that we're working with. All these stakeholders are important, and we'll continue working on it. I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. We'll probably have another one on this because I just don't think that we have enough time to, for sure tonight, to address all the important questions that people have. So with that, good night, everybody, and thank you again to our speakers.